Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Australian Bitcoin podcast brought to you by hardblock.com.au, Australia's oldest Bitcoin-only exchange. I'm Pat Clarkson, and with me is Dan Wilczynski to discuss some of the biggest news from the month of July. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm doing very well. I'm going to fill in for Alex this week. Alex is working hard with us at HardBlock, bringing in some new features as a product manager, and he wasn't able to attend the podcast this week, so I'm going to fill in. I've just come back from Europe. I was in Europe for a few weeks with my family. It was a good trip, but it was not easy. But yeah, I enjoyed it and went to Bitcoin Prague conference there, which was great. That was my first time there. It was great to be at that event. I hope to go for more conferences, Bitcoin events in the future. But yeah, I've been doing well. And how are you, Pat?
I'm good. Staying busy. Yeah, doing well. We've got so much news to cover, so maybe we should get stuck into it. We've picked some of the most interesting stories from the month, but let's start with the price as usual. So Bitcoin's price dropped around $10,000 Australian in the first week of July, partly driven by the Mt. Gox news that we'll cover soon. But it climbed steadily to $104,000 by the end of the month after it became a US election topic. This time last year, one Bitcoin was priced at 45,000 Australian dollars. And we've been hovering around the Bitcoin all-time high for about 4 months now. And there's plenty of bullish news and reasons for it to keep climbing. So first of all, let's touch on the big sale by the German authorities. They sold almost 2.6 billion euros worth of Bitcoin. A lot of people were telling them not to do this. They did sell over 50,000 Bitcoins seized from various criminal investigations. And it marks one of the largest known Bitcoin liquidations by a government. The Bitcoin were mostly confiscated from a pirated movie website service, and there's actually an ongoing criminal case over in Dresden on the issue. And a lot of people are calling this the biggest mistake in the country's history. So apparently the proceeds will go towards various public projects and law enforcement activities. The emergency sale, as they called it, was conducted so quickly and so rapidly because they were worried that there would be a significant loss in value of the Bitcoins, which is pretty funny. Actually, as of the first quarter of 2024, Germany's national government debt stands at around 2.46 trillion euros.
Yeah, so that obviously caused the price decrease at the start of July. The German government announced that it's going to be selling off a large amount of Bitcoin. How much did you say again? 50,000?
50,000.
Yeah, 50,000 Bitcoin. And that and possibly the Mt. Gox payouts is what drove the price to go down. And the sentiment was kind of bearish. So it went down from around 67 to $57,000 per Bitcoin, US dollars. But then like you said, the Republican Party and Trump endorsing Bitcoin, that was really bullish and just jumped back up. And yeah, in terms of whether the German government, well, I don't know, that's their decision. So they sold Bitcoin. There are plenty of buyers, plenty of people willing to buy the Bitcoin of them. So their loss.
I think we should be celebrating that Bitcoin is no longer in the hands of the German government. It's back in the hands of the people. So Trump has made a lot of promises to the US Bitcoin industry at the BitcoinConference 2024 in Nashville. He's obviously on his campaign trail trying to get everybody to vote for him, but he made a number of promises. The first one was that he's going to tap into America's natural gas and oil to build a lot more power plants in order to support Bitcoin mining, AI, and electric vehicles. He wants to end the war on crypto, led by Senator Warren. He vowed to fire Gary Gensler on day one of his presidency, which got such a big cheer that he actually repeated it and said it twice. He said he's going to end Operation Choke Point 2.0, which also got a big cheer. He wants to appoint a Bitcoin and crypto advisory council staffed by Bitcoiners. And he also promised there will be no CBDC while he's president. And he will defend the right to self-custody. It keeps going. He will protect freedom, property rights, and privacy. He wants to create a framework for stable coins to continue the dominance of the US dollar. And he also said that he will keep 100% of the Bitcoin the US government holds. And lastly, he reiterated that he will commute the sentence of Russ Ulbricht, the founder of the Silk Road. And this also got a huge cheer from the crowd.
Yeah, it was a very heavily pro-Bitcoin talk, and that's one of the reasons that Bitcoin rose up. I mean, it's very important. It is historic to have a former president and somebody who could be the next American president to make such a pro-Bitcoin speech. And the whole Republican Party really made a very heavy pro-Bitcoin platform. So that is, it's groundbreaking. It's historic. It's a big event. People talked about things like that, but it seems everything's happening faster than anticipated. And I know there'll be some naysayers, and we can talk about that, like, whether he will keep their promises, and, like, it's possible that's like a risk. But nevertheless, even just putting it, some of these things, like, okay, he said United States will have a Bitcoin strategic reserve or something like that. Basically, the United States government will hold Bitcoin. That's huge. Even like even if it doesn't happen, just bringing it in as a mainstream political issue by like a major party who could get elected, it makes it like a mainstream topic. In Australia,
everybody looks to the US, don't they?
Yeah, that's correct. And in Australia, okay, bring back to Australia, obviously I'm on the board of IB, Australian Bitcoin Industry Body. And, when we're discussing our platform, one of the things we discussed is, should we try and lobby to get the Australian government to hold Bitcoin on its balance sheet? But, when we're discussing, but we're thinking like, obviously that'd be great, but is it even worth us pursuing? But it seems such a far-fetched. If you go to like the Australian, politicians from Labor and Liberal and tell them you should hold Bitcoin on the balance sheet in Australia, they treat it as a joke. It's like a joke, but now it's not a joke. We're discussing it seriously in the United States. Why aren't we doing it here in Australia? It doesn't have to be a joke. Why doesn't Australia hold Bitcoin on its balance sheet? It should. Like, it gives us more credibility if we talk to Australian politicians now, like, about that. So even, just bring these things on, like, kind of on an agenda is huge. Yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts? Did you watch this speech?
I watched the speech in 2x speed, which made it even more funny. His voice was quite hilarious, but it was good. I mean, it is obviously part of his campaign trail. A lot of people aren't really taking his promises too seriously, but actually, US Senator Lummis has unveiled the Bitcoin Act, and they are wanting to purchase up to 1 million Bitcoins over the next 5 years. And they will have quarterly proof of reserve reports. So it looks like it is already going ahead.
Well, she made a proposal, but obviously she's also from the Republican Party. They didn't win the election yet. It's going to be a proposal to the Senate or whatever, but it's unlikely to get through, from my understanding.
But at least it's being discussed. At least they're trying.
Yeah, it brings it up. It brings it up as a discussion point, but it's more of I don't think it's like as a realistic thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was that. Also, RFK Jr., independent candidate, also he made a very pro-Bitcoin talk, and he also has a very pro-Bitcoin stance. He also made a commitment to hold Bitcoin on the United States balance sheet. Of course, he's not going to get elected, but again, mentioning that is good. And I watched the speech a few days ago. I mean, Trump's speech. I'll tell you some of my thoughts, some of my other thoughts about it. So while the speech was very heavily pro-Bitcoin, it seemed clear to me that Trump himself doesn't have huge knowledge about Bitcoin. It was pretty obvious that people around him gave him the talking points of what to say to keep the crowd happy, but it didn't seem like he actually has kind of a deep understanding. He was just saying what he was told to say, but it probably means that people around him, they have decent knowledge of Bitcoin, and it's likely people like Vance, the potential vice president, he's actually released his financial statement. He's a Bitcoin holder, and he comes from like tech, Silicon Valley environment. So he's very pro Bitcoin. And Vivek is also very pro Bitcoin. He probably influenced Trump a lot. Also, Trump's son, Eric Trump, also has been attending the Bitcoin conferences and has been hanging around with a kind of Bitcoin crowd. So those are the people probably around him, like younger people than Trump, who are kind of influencing him. And credit to Trump for kind of taking that influence and siding with that. But it's clear Trump doesn't have huge knowledge about it himself. RFK Jr., actually, I heard him speak, and he has much better knowledge than Trump.
Was RFK using the C word? I know Trump was using the C word a lot, crypto.
Yeah, he was using like I noticed that Trump was doing like Bitcoin and crypto. Obviously, Trump is a politician. He's trying to get votes, so he's being the most inclusive he can to get as much votes as he can. Again, and that goes back to the point, some criticism people were making, like, "Oh, can we trust that?" And to be honest, if Trump wins, we don't even know if he wins, but if he does win, I think a lot of his commitments, he won't quite fulfill them 100%. But even if he doesn't fulfill them 100%, if he fulfills them 20%, okay, that's still good. I know politicians lie, for sure. And people say, oh, you can't trust politicians. But, going back on his word would be a huge betrayal of Bitcoin community. And there is a cost for that. And they're donating to him now. That's another reason, why he probably supports it. Like getting the votes. People who hold Bitcoin are getting pretty wealthy these days. So, and some of those wealthy Bitcoin holders have been donating now to the Republican Party, because the Republican Party does have this pro-Bitcoin stance. Yeah, so I mean, look, it's very interesting. And even if Trump doesn't fulfill all those commitments, just bring it up as an issue, like as an election talking point, mainstream election issue. Someone bring these things up is still a benefit. And it's likely even if he doesn't fulfill all his promises, but he would fulfill at least some of them to some degree.
Yeah, and being realistic, the US isn't going to turn into a Bitcoin country in one term from Donald Trump. It needs a little bit more than 4 years for things to make such big changes like this, but it's progress. It's all progress.
Yeah, that's right. And Safedin, the author of the Bitcoin Standard, made a good tweet about it. In some ways, there's a lot of institutional interest against doing this thing. Obviously, like even if Trump and the Republican Party desire to do these things and hold Bitcoin, and like, the US government is heavily in debt and is constantly running deficits. It needs the US dollar to fund its deficits. It doesn't have money. It needs to print money to fund its deficit. And this happened even before Trump. What's Trump going to do? He's not going to just go from a huge deficit to making a surplus. It's like a Titanic. US government, you can't kind of turn that ship around. And so he needs to print money. He needs a strong US dollar, and he needs to print dollars. He's going to need to print dollars.
It's the only trick they have.
Yeah. So, I mean, and he's going to be like, if he's buying Bitcoin, they'll be printing dollars to buy that Bitcoin, which would be devaluing the US dollar. If you're printing dollars, like infinite supply to buy a scarce good like Bitcoin, you're devaluing the dollar. I mean, it sends a message to the world, really, that even the US government doesn't have confidence in its dollar. So a lot of people within the US government would not like that. So there'll be a lot of pushback about that. It would be a good thing for America, I believe, but it would be hard to implement in reality, even if Trump and his team do have the intentions. I guess another issue is some people kind of raise the topic of, is the Bitcoin community tying itself too much to the Republican Party, which is a valid point, because maybe Trump will not win. And it's going to be like, if we throw all our eggs in the Republican basket and then the Democrats win in the United States, what would be the effect on Bitcoin from that.
And we also need to remember that one of the missions of Bitcoin was to separate money from the state. So maybe we shouldn't care what the US government is doing.
Yeah. Well, I think we should, because at the end of the day, we can separate the money from the state, but the state is still a reality. So the state has the weapons. So if you want to separate, that's a political issue. If you want to separate the money from the state, we need to that's actually getting into politics. Okay, separating religion from the state, that was like a political movement. It didn't just happen. Those were policy kind of decisions to do that separation. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on it. But yeah, it's very interesting, and we'll see what happens. Hopefully it puts pressure on the Democrats in the United States to also adopt a more pro-Bitcoin position.
So in further US news, there was a study by the Nakamoto Project seeking to understand adoption in the US when it comes to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin owners generally reflect the broader American demographic, with no significant differences in race, ethnicity, or religion, and they tended to be younger males. Politically, mostly moderates, with a small percentage identifying as libertarian. And actually, in another study by CoinWire, they found that Europe leads the world in crypto transaction volume, with 40 trillion US dollars being transacted in 2024. And Asia was a little bit behind in second place. Russia was one of the biggest traders of crypto, with over 600 billion US dollars. And Britain was in second place. And then surprisingly, Ukraine was in third place with over 440 billion US dollars in trade volume. So Dan, are these pretty big numbers, or should we expect a lot more in the next few years?
I'm sure Bitcoin's going to grow, so I'm sure we'll get more. Yeah, but going back to the statistics you mentioned, I was kind of surprised by it. It said that the average Bitcoin holder, their political positions don't really differentiate from the mainstream, from the kind of cross-section of US society, which was surprising, because you expect much more libertarians. And the study said that there was a very small bias, like a small increase in libertarian viewpoints among Bitcoin holders, but not significant. Yeah, that was very surprising, because certainly if you go on Twitter or go to events, does definitely seems to be a very heavy libertarian type leanings, and probably more right wing leanings also. So I was very surprised by that. Statistics can be very misleading sometimes. So I'm still not sure if I fully believe with statistics, because anecdotally, if I meet Bitcoiners, there's definitely a heavy libertarian bias. And I'm not sure, I guess I'm not sure if the statistics were done correctly, because it gives the cross section of Bitcoin holders. But what does it mean by a Bitcoin holder? Because there's a lot of people holding like $10 of Bitcoin on Coinbase. But what about people holding like 20 Bitcoin in a cold storage wallet, like long term? I guess they're not kind of the same people exactly. So it's possible that the reason those statistics come out that there's no differentiation is because it just equated all Bitcoin holders as the same way. Probably like the people who are actually more committed to Bitcoin, who like to go to Bitcoin events, who hold large amounts of Bitcoin, who kind of go all in on Bitcoin. I'm guessing what would their actual political kind of viewpoints, and would they be more libertarian leaning than the average kind of US citizen?
And for everybody out there who's just listening, we will put a link to the full report. You can go check out the graphs and the statistics that they've gathered. Okay, moving on over to the Mt. Gox repayment saga. So Mt. Gox repays their customers with approximately 9 billion US dollars worth of Bitcoin and the dirty BitcoinCash. The Tokyo-based Bitcoin exchange actually collapsed in 2014 after a massive hack, but now they've started repaying their creditors in kind. The development marks the end of a decade-long bankruptcy process with delays and legal battles. Mt. Gox was actually one of the largest exchanges, apparently facilitating over 70% of all Bitcoin transactions in those early years back in 2014. But they filed for bankruptcy after losing around 740,000 Bitcoins from theft. The release of around 141,000 Bitcoins started in early July, added to the downward pressure on Bitcoin's price.
Yeah, it's been a long time saga, 10 years. Yeah, and Mt. Gox at that point, it was basically the only Bitcoin exchange. And I'm pretty sure a lot of these people didn't really expect to ever see their Bitcoins after Mt. Gox went down. So good on them. After 10 years, it's actually a very positive thing for them because it then forced them to hold the Bitcoin. Maybe they would have sold some of it earlier, but now they had to hold it and they get a very good price. So like who would have thought they'd get it back? That's awesome to hear for them. And it's great that this kind of has finally finished after 10 years, this huge long saga with a positive outcome.
Russia has approved Bitcoin mining in the nation and also using crypto as cross-border settlements. So from September 1st, 2024, an experimental regime will allow authorized companies to conduct cross-border cryptocurrency settlements. The existing ban on domestic Bitcoin payments remains, but also starting from November 1st, registered entities and entrepreneurs can legally mine cryptocurrencies, while unregistered individuals will face energy consumption limits. The Bank of Russia and other institutions will oversee mining activities and can restrict digital currency transactions to try and preserve monetary stability. So the Russian central bank is using cryptocurrencies as a way to get around Western sanctions. Making international payments and trade is a lot more difficult with these sanctions, restricting the use of the US dollar and other currencies. And so Russia has legalized cryptocurrency payments for international trade. And actually, El Salvador approached Russia proposing crypto for transactions between the two countries when trading. And El Salvador, as you probably know, has adopted Bitcoin as legal tender and had a lot of trouble trading with Russia, which is a big trading partner, due to these Western sanctions, preventing them from using the US dollar.
I've been talking about this possibly happening years ago, I think, on the podcast. I guess it's too early stage, it's too kind of experimental, but it's very interesting to see. That's part of one other thing Trump said also in his speech, right? He said, if we don't adopt Bitcoin, other countries will adopt it. And a lot of people were previously afraid that the governments will try and ban Bitcoin, but there is kind of like a arms race, right? And Max Kaiser talks about it. Bitcoin is like gunpowder. And you might think gunpowder is not good, but like if one country adopts gunpowder and you don't adopt gunpowder, you're gonna fall behind, you're gonna lose. So maybe Russia, okay, doesn't allow it within its country, which is a mistake for them. That's their mistake. But very like, okay, moving forward, they're planning to experiment using it for international trade. But yeah, I mean, whichever country starts using it and adopts it faster is gonna benefit. It is kind of like the gunpowder of monetary technology, and the first one to adopt it will get the biggest advantages. It's made for international trade. It's permissionless money, so it's very good for settling trade. And the problem for a place like Russia that wants to trade, for example, with El Salvador, like what are they going to trade in? Which currency? They have to use a currency, and El Salvador probably doesn't really need that many rubles, the Russian rubles, and Russia probably doesn't need it doesn't need the Bitcoin because the national currency of El Salvador is Bitcoin. So I mean, they can now use Bitcoin to trade with it. Apart from the previous situation was, I mentioned, for example, okay, if Russia wants to trade with Iran or India, either they use the US dollar or they use each other's currency, but Russia doesn't need so many of the Indian rubles or the Indian whatever currency they use in India.
Rupees, is it?
India does rupees, yeah, and India doesn't need that much of Russian rubles. So it's like if they sell something and to each other, they got a currency that they don't want. And Mike's tried very hard. So the answer is glaringly obvious to use Bitcoin. and that's what we're starting to do. And settling trade, it will encourage businesses. It will require, if you want to do it on a large scale, like in serious, right now we're experimenting, but if you want to do it in a serious way, it would require the actual national governments and the big companies doing the trade to hold stockpiles of Bitcoin. When they sell or want to buy something, they will need Bitcoin, they will need stockpiles of Bitcoin. If Russia is selling a lot of wheat to El Salvador, for example, and they have a bumper harvest and they sell a lot of wheat, they'll get a lot of Bitcoin, and in 3 or 4 years' time, there'll be a shortage of bananas, and they'll be buying, with that Bitcoin, they'll be buying bananas from El Salvador or whatever it is, right? It requires them to stop Bitcoin, the national governments and the countries and the actual individual businesses. But for this to also work, what they do need is they need like a domestic Bitcoin market. So they like a lot of liquidity. You require liquidity if you want to do it on a large scale. And to get that liquidity, they need local exchanges, for example, in Russia, in El Salvador, and local usage of a currency, which unfortunately Russia is making the mistake of not allowing locally within Russia, allowing the use of Bitcoin. So that means there's not many Russian exchanges, there's not much liquidity for Bitcoin within Russia because of that. But maybe that will change. It will probably, not maybe, to be honest, I am pretty confident it will change. And in the future, it will relax those rules and allow Bitcoin usage internally. That's what it will need to do. It will need like an internal market for Bitcoin liquidity. And yeah, I think this is going to happen more and more. And the first countries who start doing that they'll gain the businesses, because there'll be like companies, Bitcoin companies, helping to facilitate by trade. You need experience how to do that, how to do these things. And it's going to be big business doing that in the future. And the first countries who do that will gain that experience, and they'll build that new financial system based on Bitcoin. The first move advantage, the first countries who will do that will help build the new financial trade system. Like the book says, the Bitcoin standard, the gold standard was that all the countries used gold and they traded based on gold. The Bitcoin standard, they'll be trading on Bitcoin. And who is going to build that standard, like the supporting infrastructure around that? We'll see. But yeah, it's interesting and exciting.
Yeah, no more shipping gold bars around. We're down to Bitcoin, an international currency that can't be counterfeited and works brilliantly for overseas trade.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I think a year ago I read some article where, because of that problem with trading, not wanting to use the local currencies, at one point actually Russia, like 1 or 2 years ago, bought, or I think traded with Iran, and they actually used physical gold. They actually physically had to ship gold around, which is something like from the 19th century. But they had to resort to that because they had no other way to trade. So it's like, well, the answer is Bitcoin, and it's obvious.
All right, brilliant. Moving on, we've got some more US news. Samourai developer William Lonergan Hill, also known as Tdev, to be released on bail. The US government has agreed to release Samourai wallet founder William Lonergan Hill on bail. He was extradited from Portugal for the court proceedings, and his bail was set at $2 million, which was backed by his family. The defense requests that he be allowed to go back and live in Portugal while waiting for his trial, arguing that he doesn't pose a flight risk, and they've criticized the prosecution's aggressiveness. Hill's defense claims that his work on the Samourai wallet should not qualify as money transmitting services under FinCEN guidance. Do you think it qualifies as money transmitting service?
Well, is Bitcoin money or not? Like, that's the first question. Because
Yeah.
the US government says Bitcoin is not money. Well, make your mind up. That's the first point. I think Trump said that he would kind of stop this war on crypto, on Bitcoin and crypto. So we'll see how that goes.
And in similar news, TornadoCash developer Roman Storm was granted a delay in his trial, but Alexey Pertsev was denied bail. So the US judge has granted a delay in the trial of Roman Storm, rescheduling it to early December. In addition, his fellow developers Semenov and Pertsev face charges of criminal money laundering too. A Dutch court denied bail for Pertsev, who now has to prepare his appeal in prison. Pertsev lawyers argue that his detention impedes his defense preparation, emphasizing the need for him to be able to access computers and things to help explain technical aspects of the case. Pertsev is being sentenced to over 5 years in prison for allegedly laundering $2.2 billion through TornadoCash. Also, the Mempool Accelerator is now live. Previously, if your transaction got stuck in the Mempool due to trying to broadcast it with a low fee, or perhaps due to network congestion, it gets stuck and it never gets picked up and put in a block. Previously, you had to talk to a miner or use a Bitcoin Accelerator service. But now, Mempool.space has made it simple, providing an equivalent of replace by fee. You pay an additional fee, and miners who are cooperating with Mempool will actually pick up your transaction and put it into a block for you. This service is available for individual users via Lightning or via the Cash app. And also for enterprises, they have an offer for cost-efficient bulk transactions.
So yeah, basically Mempool.space, this isn't the first business was doing it. There's other Bitcoin transaction accelerators, but they're doing that. And you can go to the website. So if you've got a stack transaction, you can pay them, and they've got deals with miners where they can kind of get that transaction approved. So yeah, if you have a stack transaction, you can use that service. Other accelerators, you can pay with Bitcoin, or you can pay actually with just even dollars or whatever. So I'm not sure how Mempool.space works, but I guess it's kind of out of band that the actual miners get paid out of band also. And that can be with Bitcoin or however Mempool.space settles it. But basically the transaction, unlike replace by fee, actually replaces the whole transaction and with a transaction with a higher fee. This doesn't replace the transaction. This is just like the miner will include a transaction with a lower fee than it should have, because the miner gets paid out of band by Mempool.space, and Mempool.space gets paid out of band by you. And that can be paid with Bitcoin or some other way. We're not actually replacing by fee. That's how most accelerators work, and I'm assuming that's how this works.
Yeah, so you pay an additional fee, and they'll pick up your transaction and put it into a block for you.
Basically, yeah. You could go to the miners, but now Mempool.space kind of simplifies that process for you. They have the deals with the miners.
On to a little bit more technical news. Proton Mail launches self-custody Bitcoin wallet. The privacy-focused Swiss technology company has launched Proton Wallet, a self-custody Bitcoin wallet. It's available in early access at the moment and does require a Proton subscription, allowing you to make Bitcoin transactions via email, which is apparently as user-friendly as PayPal, while maintaining decentralized, non-custodial principles. It's an open source wallet using end-to-end encryption and rotates public addresses for further privacy. And they're looking to include Lightning support in the future. Proton Wallet offers Bitcoin purchasing in over 150 countries and has 24/7 customer support. On to our last news item. Gold demand hits a Q2 record high driven by central banks. The World Gold Council reported that gold demand reached a record high in the second quarter of 2024, primarily driven by central bank purchases. The data shows central banks bought 387 tons of gold during this period, a 30% increase compared to this time last year. Actually, the price of gold rose almost 20% in the last year, and nations are continuing to store their wealth in gold due to economic uncertainties and geopolitical tensions. The council also noted that the investment demand for gold, including gold bars, gold coins, and ETFs, saw a rise as well. Thanks, everybody, for listening through to the end. There's a lot more news out there that we'll be covering next time, probably in 2 weeks. All the best from us. And yeah, Dan, do you have any final comments?
No, good to talk with you, Pat, and hope the listeners enjoyed it and got something out of it. Give us any feedback if you have any feedback of what you liked and what you didn't like. And yeah, we'll be talking next time.
All right. Thank you, everyone.